Please take a moment to look around the room. This is our Sangha for the night. Welcome to the new faces. I see some new faces here. So nice to sit together. Welcome on Zoom. It's good to see everybody. Is the sound okay in both places? Wonderful. So I've been sort of muddling through my practice lately. And I thought that that wouldn't be a good thing to talk about. And yet, you know, when I began to consider what was worth bringing tonight, I often try to bring something that I'm completely engaged with, something that's happening for me. And so this is what's been happening for me, is kind of dry, scratchy practice. Not the best. And when I mentioned that to my husband, muddling through the practice lately, his response to me was, well, boredom is an intense thing, really. And I laughed. I thought, maybe there is something here. So tonight what I want to talk about is how our practice has seasons, you know, where it's verdant and rich sometimes, and we harvest a lot of insight, and other times it's kind of dry and scratchy and barely there. And so that is part of the First Noble Truth, that it's not great all the time, right? And so knowing that, as we do, as good little students of the Buddha here, it makes us really prepared for these times when it doesn't feel like there's a rich harvest. And we still know what to do, and hopefully we can laugh about it and enjoy it. So there's two aspects of the Buddha Dharma, probably many more, that inform this topic tonight. And I want you to reflect on your practice. While I can only report in on my practice, right? But be thinking about your own practice as we talk for a few minutes here. And so when the raft of practice runs ashore and gets stuck, then we not only have the noble truth that things are not always great, but we also have wise effort. It's time to actually figure out, how much do we roll up our sleeves and try, and how much do we just let it be as it is? Because you really can't muscle your way through this that much. And then there's wise view also, which is, again, what's the long view here? What can I sustain? Have I created something that's not sustainable somehow? So first, let's talk about the doldrums. Even that term, I got curious about it. This term appears in 1824 when sailors, everything was wind-powered, experienced being stuck near the equator, because the winds were blowing in different directions, and occasionally these big ships could not move if there was no wind. And the most serious thing was that they would run out of water, fresh water, if they didn't catch a big wind at some point. And it was probably very boring too. And that's where the term doldrums came from. And so how do we put wind in our own sails, right, when things are feeling stuck? And how do we change the circumstance without creating something artificial? Because, the teachings say we're not creating any special states, or we're not grasping after this result or that result. But at some point, you got to get out and push, maybe. Maybe that's not the right, if you're on a ship, maybe not. But even the doldrums can deliver a big return on investment, so to speak, if we know how to make a relationship with it. one that includes curiosity, and one that includes kindness. So that's basically the whole talk in a nutshell. Got it? Seriously, I don't need to tell you that this is something that will happen again and again. And so for me personally, when I feel stuck or sort of empty in my practice, I have to stop myself from feeling like I need to do something. It needs to be different. And I think recognizing that, or, recognizing that, all I need to do really is shift out of judgment to, that's a good first move. It doesn't need to be different. It's just how it is. And try to find curiosity. And if that's not available, just be kind to myself. It's like, ugh, not fun right now. And then often I like to see for myself what is the absolute least amount of energy that I can bring to my practice, right? Because it doesn't take that much energy to do what we just did. It takes a little bit of awareness to keep bringing the mind close. We don't need to overtry. It makes it miserable when we overtry. And so titrating the energy down and finding that sweet spot. We're not falling asleep, but we're not wandering away. And so I often use the phrase, actually I have it taped up in the kitchen, things have come to be this way. I wonder what will happen next. And sometimes that can actually make me chuckle, just because it feels like nothing is happening at all, sometimes for days on end. But we know that one of the main characteristics of existence is change. So it doesn't last, it can't last. Another natural thing for me, at least, is to begin comparing now to other times when practice seemed effortless and insights flow like honey. And then my helpful inner critic is saying, well, it's not like that now. And I have to ask her to take a seat. Thank you for that information. So basically, all is not lost. It is simply another freaking learning opportunity, right? Wise effort and wise view are just waiting to be called upon here. They're literally waiting in the wings. And we don't have to think of them with those specific words, but really that's what turns our ship into the wind once more. It's just remembering that things change, it's temporary, it's not a big deal, and summoning the least amount of effort to kind of just get us pointed in the right direction, get rid of that bad attitude if that's there. Another thing is to understand what is going on. We don't really need the why. I think we can go down a rabbit hole if we're going, why is this happening? Oh, it must have been that, or it could have been that, or, and we're just lost in that. But if you can just say what is happening, you're diagnosing the illness or the problem, lack of energy, lack of attention, maybe you're sad. It could be many things. And so just sticking a little label on it can kind of help you then move forward. It's kind of like when you get a diagnosis when you don't feel good. Oh, I have the flu. Okay. So now you know what to do, right? And there's not much you can do when you have the flu, but sit it out. So this is how we're friendly to ourselves when we hit these dry patches in our spiritual life or in our practice. We're kind. We just know that no matter how long it seems like it's going to last, at some point it changes. So I've mostly been talking about formal practice, like sitting on the cushion. But now I'd like to switch over. Before we leave that topic, a very stealthy thing to do if you're having trouble getting yourself onto the chair or onto the cushion is do some kind of sit anyway. Try a 1-minute sit. And I know that seems ridiculous to people who are used to 30 and 40-minute sits, but if we lose that consistent thread, it only gets worse. And so you've got to get yourself to the cushion, even if it's a 1-minute or a 5-minute sit. And just prove to yourself that you're willing to be committed, maybe kind of crazy, right? Committed to practicing, even if it's for a very short time. So continuity is the magic there. And of course, it's scientifically proven that sitting is cumulative. So it's like making deposits into an interest-bearing account. It's not going to grow if you don't keep feeding it, right? So keep feeding it no matter what. There's a guy named Stephen Hayes. He's a PhD who developed a kind of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. He wrote a book called The Liberated Mind. And he said it's good, even when things are going well, to pick something that's a little bit tough and then stick with it for a time that we determine, just to prove that we can do it, right? Like putting the phone on the charger at 7 p.m. and not picking it up until the morning, and doing that for 30 days. Or taking a walk around the block every day for 6 months. You know, you can pick anything. Going without dessert for a year, just to see if you can do it. And he actually says this is really good for our self-esteem, you know, especially if we pick something that's doable. That's just a little bit challenging, right? Don't scream at the dog. So I really like that idea. This is practicing keeping our commitments. And if we notice that we're failing a lot, then it might be time to reassess, to pull in some people to be accountable to, or to take a more serious look at what our commitments are. Maybe we have too many commitments or they're too big. So one beautiful part of this that's easy is that when our formal sits on the cushion are not going smoothly, we can easily see that need for control popping up. We can observe that we really want to get things back on track. And this would be a really easy time to just relax that judging mind that it needs to be different. And see if we think it's ridiculous to do a 1-minute sit, right? Because it's really not. So loosen the grip on the need to have a perfect 30 or 40-minute sit every day. Let go a little, see how that feels. Notice if you're labeling yourself as a loser or, you know, like beating yourself up, like, gosh, I can't even do this. How does it feel to explore some of those feelings? What kind of thoughts are present? Are you able to be kind to yourself? Or are you being mean to yourself in secret? So, if we were a scientist taking notes out in the field, this would be a very rich time. There'd be a lot of information here, because we are basically scientists observing our own behavior, our own thoughts, and we are hopefully taking notes and learning what works and what doesn't work. The Daily Tejaniya today was spot on for this talk. He said, because we want to learn about the nature of the mind that knows, and the objects that are known, we don't try to calm things down or remove things or change things. Thoughts, sensations, perceptions, emotions. We don't interfere or control, but we observe, because we want to understand the mind. that knows and the objects that are known in their natural state. It's like watching a wild animal in its natural state, right? This is wise view, understanding and aligning with what's actually happening and then working from there. He further says, if thoughts, perceptions, or emotions are overwhelming in any given moment, switch to a neutral object. That's why we have the breath, right? Stay with the breath until the mind and body are settled, and then return again to open awareness and observe whatever's happening. So to sum up this first part, when sitting is not going well, so what? Drop your judgment for things to be different. Learn how that feels, watch the results, and don't forget that 1 minute sit, right? So an equally important part of this is what are we doing when we're not on the cushion? Because there's huge opportunity there for mindfulness. Maybe our practice becomes more of an off the cushion practice. And by the way, this is most of our life that we're talking about is off the cushion. So we really want to take a look at cultivating that daily moment to moment, washing the dishes awareness, changing a diaper awareness, sweeping the porch awareness, all the things we do, being on a Zoom call awareness, everything that's happening. And this can grow really strong when the formal practice is in the trash can for some reason. So that's kind of a nice thing to be able to shift into. Now, when both of these things are not going well, it can begin to feel like an animal is clawing inside your brain. Like things don't seem to be able to satisfy you and you don't seem to be able to be calm. It's the daily dukkha delivered right to your door. Bryn Silver says, the desperate mind will never get what it wants. I think that's a pretty interesting thing to explore. What does he mean by that? One way to address this state of dissatisfaction is to find anything, any tiny thing that is pleasant, and bring your attention there. It could be the taste of toothpaste in your mouth, or it could be the temperature in this room, or it could be you have your favorite socks on. It could be any tiny thing that just gives you a little glimmer, and focus on that and try to string a few of those together. Maybe even just a tiny smile, You've heard that saying, your day usually goes the way the corners of your mouth go. There's something to that, yeah. So these things are real. We're not making them up. They're pleasant. They're all around us. And even though that won't last, neither will the clawing animal inside your brain. So begin soothing and balancing the dysregulation in a different way. We often reach for the phone and try to soothe ourselves by streaming data. How much sense does that make? More stimulation, distraction, diversion. And in the moment, it does feel kind of pleasant. But in the long run, it contributes to dysregulation. Less able to go to sleep, less able to calm the clawing animal down when it's time to go to bed. So when we experience a frantic, anxious mind, it's often simply from a lack of rest, from trying to soothe with information feeds and scrolling, instead of just a little bit of silence and simplicity. Maybe you cancel a few appointments, Maybe you don't need to go to lunch constantly or keep up with everybody all the time. So both of these things are pretty easy to do, but one leads to dysregulation and the other potentially leads to balance. It's said that the only true rest is deep samadhi. And that's when we're able to sit still for a long time and we come into that concentrated, quiet state, aware and relaxed, and the mind inclines towards insight and truth. And we have that treasure of deep, restorative rest. So if that's a distant memory for you, let's look at one or two more things before we end tonight. We often want to pinpoint a single thing when our practice feels like it's off track. But the truth is, it's usually a multitude of things. It's a multi-causal world. Another thing to realize is many of us love to travel, and a lot of us travel a lot now. And it's super exciting, but perhaps we're in a different time zone, sleeping in a different bed, eating different food, interacting with new people. You know, we have a new sleep schedule. So that can actually knock your practice to the side for a while. You have to be very intentional, or the opposite extreme also happens. There's not enough challenge in your life. You're in the doldrums. You need some change to test you, to interest you, to engage you. So along these same lines, if relationships that are primary to us shift, that can definitely reverberate through your practice, and you'll find yourself chewing on that, cogitating on that, instead of just breathing some air into it and letting it be the way it is when you sit. So as life happens and all this stuff happens, we can definitely remember anicca, which is the Pali word for change, impermanence. Oh, this is one of the characteristics of being alive, as all this stuff is happening all the time, and it will never stay the same. And I'm going to have to navigate this in a skillful way or be unhappy about it. Occasionally, we're just living our lives with things being particularly heavy these days. That's my experience. I can feel the weight of it, just kind of a little bit tired. And like I said a few talks back, literally just getting more rest can be the key to figuring this out. The last time I spoke, somebody on Zoom recommended a book called Why We Sleep. And then I walked into Elizabeth Kabalka's house, and there was the book. It was a great synchronicity. I was able to borrow it and read it, and I really recommend it because it looks at the scientific reasons that we have to sleep. We will die if we don't sleep. And it also leaves a lot of room for mystery in there. There's a lot that we don't know about why we must sleep. I want to mention something pretty pedestrian before I end tonight, but it's so delightful for me, and that is YouTube Premium streamed on my TV and dialed into the Monterey Bay Aquarium live feed. I see heads shaking. It is so beautiful to have a giant screen of graceful jellyfish floating all over the wall in the living room. And it's a live feed. I mean, they're doing that while you're watching them do that. So it's just a beautiful thing. It's one of my little pleasures in life. So we've explored the extremes that get us in states of stress and dysregulation, and we've talked about looking for those small, pleasant experiences to pay attention to, be thankful for, and going back to the breath, all the while keeping that place set at the table for the ugly stuff that shows up, because it will, and then just getting enough rest. Stilling the mind with open awareness practice if your formal practice is not going so great. And then the most exciting part of the talk, boredom, the feeling of dissatisfaction that arises, that feeling actually lives right alongside open awareness. So it doesn't take much to shift from boredom to just being willing to kind of lean into it a little bit, to really see things instead of being lost in the stupor that boredom is. Being willing is key. When we're bored, we're essentially shut down to possibilities. Tiny bit of willingness opens us up to all these portals of Dharma. Yvonne Meyerhofer spoke a few weeks ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, all Dharma is relational. And so if all Dharma is relational, then basically all the natural laws of the universe are begging to be in relationship with us, and all the wise and compassionate teachings are begging to be explored and lived in our lives. They're all available to us. If we're willing, boom, the whole universe can open up. So I'm hoping that the next time you hit the doldrums or a dry spot, or you just don't want to sit, that you'll lean in, create some intimacy with yourself, get curious with your surroundings, look for any hint of satisfaction in your life, and begin to learn from silence that it's not always clear right away what's being delivered when we sit in silence, but you can be sure that something of value is accumulating there. Again, from Bryn Silver, he says, the deepest rest is very awake. And I'd like to end with a quote from Viktor Frankl. What gives light must endure burning. So when we're in the tough spots, if we can muster through, stick with it, do those 1-minute sits, eventually we'll be giving light again. So I offer this for your consideration. I don't intend in any way to minimize atrocities committed upon the Jews in Hitler's time. I know that not being able to meditate does not compare with that in any way, but I do think bearing up under all kinds of serious personal trials is something that we all go through from time to time. Thank you so much for listening tonight, and I hope your practice is rich and full of insight.